What is the first thing that comes inside your head when you hear the word ideology? You probably think of it as a set of ideas, opinions, or individual views. Well, that's all correct. Ideology is a collection of ideas. It is typically a reflection of what we believe in, and it is molded by different contributing factors. It may be our environment, family, peers, social media, the nation that we live in, our social status, our religion, our moral values, or even our educational level. We view a certain ideology based on what we believe in. A conservative may oppose the liberal, a liberal may not agree with a socialist, and a socialist may disagree with a capitalist. What sets a specific political ideology apart from other ideologies is its principle and its notion of what it considers to be ideal. We all have our ideology. We have our standards of what constitutes real freedom, what equality looks like, what is a proper government, what is justice, how should rights be exercised, and what are the considerations for labeling a society as ideal. Political ideologies refer to a certain set of ethical ideals, values, opinions, principles, doctrines, myths, or symbols of a social movement, institution, class, or a group that explain how society should work. The term ideology was developed by Antoine de Tracy in 1796 during the French Revolution. Political ideology can be classified as hegemony or an ideology of resistance. Hegemony refers to the dominant ideology in society. For example, in a capitalist society, the dominant ideology is the ideology of the bourgeoisie or the ruling class. If an ideology becomes hegemonic, it legitimizes a political system and becomes the reality or the absolute truth. The ideology of resistance, on the other hand, also known as counter-ideologies, may not accept the legitimacy of the ideology that exists in their society. The holders of this ideology wish to resist, reform, or even overthrow a given social and political structure if they find it unacceptable and unsuitable. Political ideologies reflect the structure of power in society. A politician's ideology, for example, may be an influential factor in how he or she would use or exercise his or her power. Ideologies are also weaponized by some politicians who run for certain positions for public office to persuade the people to follow and support their candidacy. Next, political ideologies structure political understanding and inspire social movements. Third, political ideologies shape political systems. And lastly, political ideologies act as a form of social cement. Ideologies can bind and unify people. The first ideology that will be discussed is socialism. The word socialist came from the Latin term sociare, meaning to combine or to share. Socialism emerged in the late 18th to 19th century in Western European countries. It sprang from the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization eventually led to a capitalist society. You can visualize this society as a society where factories and businesses are existing. It consists of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie is also the capitalist or the one who owns and controls the means of production. The proletariat, on the other hand, is the worker. They're the one who works for wages. Workers were mostly exploited and oppressed. Those harsh and barbaric conditions of workers in a capitalist society led to the creation of socialism. In the simplest definition, socialism is the opposition to capitalism. Socialism is viewed as a collectivist vision. Individuals are advised to work together, not against each other. They are expected to commit to cooperative action to gain mutual benefit.
According to Paul C. Bright, the origins of liberalism are evident in early agricultural societies 10,000 years ago that lasted until the beginning of the modern era. Liberalism as a developed ideology was a product of the breakdown of feudalism in Europe. But first, let us identify what feudalism is. Feudalism is a system in which people are allowed to live on the land provided by landlords or people in higher ranks. But they need to work and part of their income would be given to those people in higher ranks. It is believed that the end of feudalism in Europe and the emergence of a market or capitalist society were the two factors that led to liberalism's development as an ideology. The five essential concepts of liberalism, which is individualism, freedom, reason, justice, and tolerance, are its guiding principles. Liberalism has two types. The first one is classical liberalism. It is regarded as the earliest liberal tradition because classical liberal ideas developed during transition from feudalism to capitalism, and they reached their peak during the early industrialization in the 19th century. Classical liberalism believes that individuals are rationally self-interested entities. The second type of liberalism is modern liberalism. Modern liberalism believes that private sectors like businesses can also undermine people's rights. The main belief of liberalism is freedom for all people. It is said that slavery would be eliminated in this ideology and they are not going to be subjected to oppression because the individual self is the most important in this ideology. Conservatism is an ideology that rejects change, especially if these changes will be the reason for their traditions and culture to be undermined. Conservatism is defined by four central themes, which is tradition, human imperfection, hierarchy and authority, and property. In the late 18th century, conservatives promoted liberal beliefs, particularly those that support the free market. They might be considered a counter-tradition to conservative paternalism. These ideas are libertarian because they support the greatest economic liberty that has minimal government interference in the regulation of social life. However, this doesn't mean that libertarian conservatives are converted to liberalism. They just believe that liberal economics is more traditional and the conservative social philosophy based on values such as authority and duty. Conservatives are skeptical of abstract concepts and modes of thinking that promise to make sense of the unexplainable. They prefer to base their beliefs on tradition, experience, and history, having a cautious, moderate, and pragmatic approach to life and avoiding dogmatic or doctrinal beliefs to the greatest extent possible. Traditions and cultures are two factors that influence a person's identity. As a result, conservatism's weakness is its resistance to progressive change.
Environmentalism and ecologism are two strains of what has come to be labeled as the Green Movement or the Greens. Terms are derived from the ancient Greek word household or habitat and logos, which means science and argument. Protecting the environment is the main theme of environmentalism, as it seeks to preserve, protect, restore, and improve the natural environment. Environmentalism believes that dangers to the environment can be tackled within the existing political, economic, and cultural order. Its connection to politics is that to succeed, this would require wise government, appropriate legislation, and voluntary adoption of environmentally sound practices by consumers. Undergoing the subtopics of environmentalism, first we have conservative environmentalism. This is partly about conserving natural resources and protection to human and environmental health. Next we have socialist environmentalism, where planning, taxes, regulations, and other reforms are needed now to encourage green living, including recycling, greater use of public transport, and energy efficiency. Next we have liberal environmentalism. This somehow encourages people to use a decreased or only enough amount of free resources before it disappears. Next is feminist environmentalism. This is letting women to have a special role in green politics because of their crucial role as mothers and carers. Fascist environmentalism is an environmental concern we're seen as an important factor in fascist movements because lands, forests, and mountains are of special importance to the soul of a nation or race. Last, we have anarchist environmentalism. The green anarchist argues that manipulation of nature in some ways is wrong because no sector of life may be valued above another. Ecologism advocates a transformation in human-nature relations, challenges humankind as values that are of central or most important element of existence, and emphasizes respect for natural limits, and calls for significant social and economic change. Key terms that define ecologism. We have industrialism, which applies to more than the factory system, more than capitalism. Next is anti-materialism, The modern economic system has created enormous material wealth, but it has not little to increase total human happiness in recent decades. That's why material comfort by itself cannot significantly improve the quality of life once most of the basic material needs have been met. Growth. Growth can and should be stopped or at least sharply reduced. This will involve a series of radical measures. Sustainability. Applying green criteria to the economy as a whole will also emphasize on reducing consumption of energy and non-renewable resources within the goal of establishing a sustainable system. Even if greens are helpful as it looks, they have been attacked as unscientific, impractical, and even immoral. Politically, the Greens have received little electoral support, especially in Britain, but green assumptions and values are increasingly becoming part of the wider political culture, especially in the future, as people are becoming more aware of the current situation the Earth is in.
Fascism is one of the political ideologies which mean a way of organizing a society in which a government ruled by a dictator controls the lives of the people and in which people are not allowed to disagree with the government. Fasces, you can break one stick easily, but when you bundle them together, they become stronger. When a dictator convinces an entire nation to march together in lockstep, they feel strong too. An act symbolizes that it's unity with discipline, brutal if necessary. Now, let's go back to our history how fascism started in Germany. After World War I, as masses of angry people rose up, the rise of charismatic leaders who manipulated that anger, the totalitarian societies they built, and the brutal measures they used to enforce their ideology. Adolf Hitler wanted to restore Germany's national pride. They dressed in intimidating brown shirt uniforms and roamed the streets and gang, the National Socialists or the Nazis. Early Nazis found a natural base here in Munich. Nazi street gangs violently attacked unwanted outsiders, Jews, and communists. In 1923, or the beer hall, original leadership gathered their followers. They were impatient and eager to take power. Hitler waved his pistol in the air and called for the revolution to begin. Behold Putsch failed. After bloody confrontation, the police crushed it at Odeonsplatz. Hitler was arrested and sent to jail, and it seems that Germany's fascist movement was finished.
What do you think when you heard of the term feminism? Maybe most of you think of women. Why is there a political ideology that concerns women in particular? According to the United Nations report in 1980, while women represent 50% of the world population, they perform nearly two-thirds of all working hours, receive one-tenth of world income, and own less than 1% of world property. Women, unlike men, have lesser opportunities and are treated like second-class citizens of the world, which is why female revolutionaries started campaigns that led to the creation of feminism as a political ideology. Feminism is one of the most recent ideologies to emerge. It attempts to analyze the social position of women and promote the advancement of women in all areas of society. Feminists believe that there is a power struggle between men and women. The feminist ideology is anchored in two beliefs. The first one is that women are disadvantaged because of their sex, and the second one is that this advantage can and should be overthrown. The fundamental aim of feminism is to achieve the right to vote, or female suffrage. The first wave feminism happened during 1830 to 1930. It is a political movement which calls for equal legal and political rights for women. It was deeply influenced by liberal feminism. It is a form of feminism that is grounded in the belief that sexual differences are irrelevant to personal worth. The goal is to achieve women's emancipation, or to free themselves from political and legal restrictions. Feminists believe that in order to achieve that goal, they must attain the rights to vote, or suffrage. Multiple associations were established, including National Women's Suffrage Association, American Women's Suffrage Association, and Women's Social and Political Union. In first wave feminism, they achieved female suffrage. However, they realized that it's not enough to combat discrimination. That is why second wave feminism was developed. The second wave feminism emerged in the 1960s to 1970s. Women needed radical social change and political emancipation if they were to be liberated from thousands of years of male oppression. Radical feminism was one of the distinctive features of second wave feminism. It is a form of feminism that holds gender division to be the most politically significant of social cleavages, and believes that they are rooted in the structures of domestic life. Feminists believe that there is a division between public man and private woman, or what is also known as public and private spheres. The public man can participate in politics, have education and careers, indulge in art and literature. On the other hand, the private woman is expected to carry the burden of child rearing and other domestic responsibilities. In this wave, the term patriarchy emerged. Patriarchy literally means rule by the father, which describes the dominance of men both in domestic structures such as family and society at large. Feminists provoke and challenge the patriarchy or male dominance. In the second wave, feminism succeeded in raising consciousness about gender issues and gender inequality women face. Third wave feminism, also known as contemporary feminism, was developed in the 1990s due to the belief that the previous movements have limited relevance to current issues. The third wave feminism rectifies the overemphasis on the aspirations and experience of middle-class white women in developed societies. Contemporary feminism is believed to be the time to consolidate what had been achieved in the preceding campaigns and become the voice of low-income women, women in the developing societies, and women of color to be heard effectively.
Nationalism is an idea and movement that holds that the nation should be congruent with the state. As a movement, nationalism tends to promote the interests of a particular nation, especially with the aim of gaining and maintaining the nation's sovereignty over its homeland to create a nation-state. Nation is a large body of people united by common origin, history, culture, ethnicity, or language, and it refers to a group of people, while state is an independent political entity with fixed geographic boundaries and it refers to a territory. In addition, state is united by laws and regulations. The word nation has been used since the 13th century and derives from the Latin word nasci, meaning to be born. Nationalism can be defined broadly as the belief that the nation is the central principle of political organization. As such, it is based on two assumptions. Humankind is naturally divided into distinct nations. The nation is the most appropriate and perhaps only legitimate unit of political rule. Political nationalism. A form of nationalism that regards the nation as a natural political community. Usually, this is expressed through the idea of national self-determination. Cultural nationalism, a form of nationalism that places primary emphasis on the regeneration of the nation as a distinctive civilization rather than on self-government. Ethnic nationalism, a form of nationalism that is fueled primarily by a keen sense of ethnic distinctiveness and the desire to preserve it. Liberal nationalism is the oldest form of nationalism, dating back to the French Revolution and embodying many of its values. Conservative nationalism tends to develop in established nation-states rather than in those that are in process of nation-building. Expansionist nationalism is the aggressive form of nationalism that is invariably associated with the belief and doctrines which tends to blur the distinction between nationalism and racism. Nationalism is sometimes classified as a political doctrine rather than a fully fledged ideology, and sometimes portrayed as an essentially psychological phenomenon, usually as loyalty towards one's nation or dislike of other nations instead of as a theoretical construct. Also, nationalism has a schizophrenic political character.
Marxism and anarchism are essential parts of the socialist tradition, but they differ so significantly from democratic socialism and social democracy as to be worth studying as distinct ideological movements. Marxism emerged from the minds of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, began in the mid-19th century, a time defined by radical inequality and rapid technological and political change in Europe. Marx was concerned with one question: what does it mean to be free? Starting from this question, Marx developed an entire theory of history, and so he laid the foundation of the model of conflict theory, pushing the discipline to look at questions of power, inequalities, and how these things can drive societal change. Marx thought, how can people be free? Because humans are not just naturally free. When you think about it, we are actually incredibly constrained. But Marx saw that just as we freed ourselves from these natural constraints, we entangled ourselves in a new societal constraint. Marx traveled through Europe during the mid and later half of the 19th century, where he saw so much poverty and inequalities. The more he traveled, the more he explained what he saw through unequal access to resources, ownership of property, and wealth. He argued that the working class, or the proletariat, in Britain and elsewhere was being exploited by the ruling class, or the bourgeoisie. The ruling class paid the working class fewer wages than they deserved. They made them work long hours in poor conditions and kept the profit from the sale of the goods they produce. Thus, the ruling class got richer while the working class became increasingly poor and had no way of improving their possibilities unless they all came together to overthrow the ruling class in a revolution. According to Marx, the dynamic that drove human history onwards was the dysfunction or contradiction within each mode of production. Each mode had its definitive stage, which he identified in the German ideology as primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, and capitalism. Marx's concept of historical materialism is the idea that development is correlated to the emergence of the maintenance of social classes. Historical materialism sees history as progressive, but rejects the idea that it is the action of the individuals. Marxists see that the answer is economic development. Historical materialism is a theory of historical development through economic or material forces rather than political or social ones. Marx claimed that those who control the economic base also control the superstructure. That is, those who have wealth or economic power also have political power and control over the rest of the society. Marx stated that the ruling class used their control of social institutions to gain ideological dominance or control over the way people think in society. Marx asserted that the ideas of the ruling class were presented as common sense, natural, and unequal, and thus exploitative relationships were accepted by the working class as the norm. The end result of ideological control is false consciousness, where the masses are deluded into thinking that everything is fine and that the appalling in which they live and work is inevitable. As far as Marx was concerned, he had realized the truth. Capitalism was unjust, but people just hadn't realized it. He believed that political action was necessary to wake up the proletariat and bring them to a revolutionary class consciousness. Eventually, following a revolution, private property, profit motive, and the desire to exploit would be abolished. Anarchism is a political ideology often categorized as radical, due to its positioning to the political spectrum where it sits on the far left. Anarchists believe that hierarchical structures should be abolished. When it comes to the definition of anarchism in politics, the focus tends to be on its rejection of the state and government. However, anarchist ideas extend beyond these two matters. Anarchism is an ideology that is often misunderstood due to the inclusion of the word anarchy. The word anarchy comes from the Greek word anarchia, meaning without a ruler. When we hear the word anarchy, we often associate it with chaos, but it is far from what anarchism entails. Within anarchism, all coercive relationships are rejected. Instead, societies where voluntary participation and cooperation are favored. Anarchy is associated with terrorist violence, disorder, and naive extremism. It was not until Pierre-Joseph Proudhon proudly declared in his book What is Property? I am an anarchist, that the word was associated with a positive and systematic set of political ideas. Proudhon argued that the real laws of society have nothing to do with authority, but rather stem from the nature of a natural social order. The main themes of his work were mutualism, federalism, and the power of the working class to liberate themselves through organized economic activity. During the 19th century, anarchism was a significant component of a broad but growing socialist movement. In 1864, Proudhon's followers joined with Marx to set up the International Workingmen's Association, or the First International. The First International collapsed in 1871 because of growing antagonism between Marxists and anarchists. Anarchists believe that political authority in all its forms, and especially in the form of the state, is both evil and unnecessary. Therefore, they look to a stateless society through the abolition of law and government. Anarchism is characterized by principled opposition to certain forms of social hierarchy. Anarchists believe that the state is unnecessary because order and social harmony do not have to be imposed from above through government. Central to anarchism is the belief that people can manage their own affairs through voluntary agreement without top-down hierarchies or a system of rewards and punishments. However, anarchism draws from two different ideological traditions, liberalism and socialism. It has resulted in rival individualist and collectivist forms of anarchism. While both accept the goal of statelessness, they advance very different models of the future anarchist society. Collectivist anarchism emphasizes the supremacy of the collective, a self-governing and freely formed community or association over the individual or the state. Collectivists believe that humans are social animals that needs to help each other for the common good than striving for individual self-interest. Individualist anarchism is located on the libertarian right of the political spectrum, since it takes classical liberalism to its logical and extreme anti-state endpoint. Individualist anarchism values the individuals and individual freedom above all else, and regards society as a loose grouping of unrelated autonomous individuals. To protect this personal autonomy, individualists argued that the state has to be abolished because it has the power to impose taxes, conscriptions, and laws. Freed from such restrictions, individuals will behave rationally, exercise personal sovereignty, and work together voluntarily in the self-interest pursuit of their specific objectives. Anarchism is unusual among political ideologies because it has never succeeded in winning power, at least at the national level. Indeed, as they seek to radically disperse and decentralize political power, this has never been their goal. No society or nation has therefore been remodeled according to anarchist principles. Hence, it is tempting to regard anarchism as an ideology of less significance than liberalism, socialism, conservatism, or fascism, each of which has proved itself capable of achieving power and reshaping societies.